working on the left end of the radio dial in Columbia for 30 years. He's done fundraising, volunteer trainings, and hosted talk and music programs at Columbia's community radio station, KOPN. He spent over 5 years working as an announcer and producer at KBIA. And then in 2019, he started a business called the Recollection Agency, preserve life stories. And he also does a podcast called Mo Curious. And whenever we send the announcements out, we can send links to both of these things. We've got hyperlinks. Cam would be happy to put those in.
Well, he gave me them.
Great. And the Mo Curious, it explains Missouri history mostly through recently recorded oral histories. In 2022, he recorded a dozen oral histories with longtime KOPNers about their experiences at the station. And he turned these recordings into a radio show, KOPN, the first 50 years in honor of our 50th anniversary. So we are thrilled to have him here. And I am going to turn the camera slowly so I don't nauseate people at home to Trevor and let him take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everybody, for coming today to the Muleskinners meeting. I'm the entertainment for the present moment. For the people who are on Zoom, we don't want you to feel left out. So the introductions, hopefully you got those. And you know, COVID has messed everything up. We're kind of getting right from it, you know, but we're still, in a way, we're splintered because people are anywhere in the world and people are here, but people are able to come together. We're all in one space, so to speak. But for the people who are not here, you know, it kind of started out as maybe a COVID thing and then it became a convenience thing or both things. So I wanted the folks at home to know that if you were concerned about COVID, that I myself, here's my COVID card, and I am triple vaccinated from D&H on West Broadway, and this is my to-go container when I go to concerts. It used to be, you know, in the period of the pandemic, you had to have your COVID card and your earplugs. So there's earplugs in a plastic, single-use plastic baggie, which I've used many times. But that's not what I wanted to talk about today, was Zoom or the plastics. But I am, for my job, I write grants for Missouri River Relief, which is a nonprofit based here in Columbia that engages people with the Missouri River, gets them out on the river, educates them about the ecology of the river. And I've been doing that for a little while now. That's not what I want to talk to you about. My wife and I also, we're blessed enough to own and maintain this trio of historic bungalows. So over the last few years, I've just learned a lot about how to maintain 100-year-old houses and when you need to call somebody and when you can do the thing or swing the hammer. But that's not what I want to talk to you about either. I'm curious, of the people who are participating in this meeting, can I see a show of hands for who's ever heard of KOPN? Everybody except the 10, oh, even the 10-year-olds. So.
David Mallory said, Sarah, raise your hand. Yeah. And people at home, I'm sure. I know Carl is also a programmer. Carl is raising her hand.
Carl hasn't heard of it, I'm concerned.
And Scott Crystal used to do stuff with Kevin decades ago.
Yeah. And Dave Taylor's.
Did everyone sign in?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I signed you in.
All right. So if you're not here, you're missing that sign in. But I don't want you to dwell on what you don't have. What you do have is this great community radio station that's been going for 50 years. And I walked up to KOPN, and I say up because KOPN used to be at 915 East Broadway, and you had to walk up like 15 stairs that were carpeted and usually smelled kind of weird. I went up there initially because I had it in my mind from when I was a kid. My dad lived in Columbia after my parents got divorced, and I'd come back and visit him. And we're walking on Broadway, and there was a concrete canopy. Folks, I'm sure remember this concrete canopy. And there was a sign that said KOPN. And I was kind of aware of radio from the show WKRP that I thought was really funny and maybe somehow stimulated my desire to get into radio. I asked my dad, I was probably 8 or 9, and we're walking along under the canopy, and I asked him, what's KOPN? And he said, it's a radio station that was started by hippies, son.
Hey, Al Packer.
That's about accurate.
Dave Taylor says it's about that.
So you know, I planted that seed in my 8-year-old brain, like 9-year-old brain, like, wow, this Columbia is pretty cool that it has this. So when I graduated from college, I just, you know, or graduated from high school. I didn't necessarily go to college. I just moved to Columbia, and there was University of Missouri as a pretext for why I was here. And that's why I didn't go to the campus radio station. You know, there's KCOU is a lower power college radio station, and I just didn't feel like that was my tribe. That wasn't my people. And I came up to KOPN, and I found this incredible tribe of people who had some ties to the University of Missouri, but mostly it was just like exposure to the whole world. But what I do want to do today is share with you all some of the outcomes of the KOPN Oral History Project. This came up now because KOPN is turning 50, so it seemed like a good time to capture stories of people who had been there at the beginning and help start this new community, you know, this now venerable community institution, or anti-institution institution. So I also saw these people getting older, not these people specifically, but people in my life. And Sarah had said in the introduction, he started this business. I have a business called the Recollection Agency. When I worked at KBIA, the thing I really loved about that was interviewing people and doing longer form stories and just getting to hear people's stories and share that with the world. So I started the business, the Recollection Agency, and hung up my shingle, so to speak, to record people's life stories, not knowing who would come. And people have come, and they've asked me to collect life stories I never imagined. I've never even dreamt that these people existed. So I met some amazing people through that. So I'm doing this business. I started a podcast called Mo Curious about Missouri history, because I realized nobody who I'm interviewing with these life stories, they don't want to share those life stories, right? These aren't like public people. These are just private individuals who approach me and say, yeah, we want to hire you through Recollection Agency to record grandma's story or record my mom and dad's story. But they don't still want to put all that out on YouTube. So I created, or just out in the world. So I created the podcast Mo Curious, and I've done 13 episodes. So I've done 13. I need to get off 13 because that's maybe unlucky. Most podcasts I've noticed that they die at 4 episodes. So I feel like I'm way over that.
Way over that.
So the podcast is a way for me to capture recent oral histories and share a story. And the people I find them because they've done something significant. So often the people with the podcast, they're ready to talk. When I find my way to them, they're not famous people, but they're like, yeah, really, I want to talk about that. And I found through the KOPN Oral History Project, all these people wanted to talk about it. So can we see the PowerPoint? Is it possible? Sarah, please. Please, thank you. You're welcome.
Okay.
So-
He's testing my limits. Be patient with people at home.
Remember, you want to share the bottom of the tick box. Even though
Yes,
there's no
that's right. It's because we restrict.
Do you also talk about themselves?
I do. Sometimes people need prompts. So the question from the assemble here was, do I prompt people? Do I help them tell their story? Absolutely. Some people, they need that. There's been a few people I've sat down with and just hit record, and they don't need me at all. Like I've left the room and gone to the bathroom. Because we're sitting there when we do these live story recordings, we're doing a couple hour sessions at a time. So it's kind of, fluid, and I can edit all that stuff out if they run out of steam.
Yeah, Margie Sable didn't need much prompts.
No, Alice comments, people needing prompts to the KOPN Oral History Project. No. With the Oral History Project, an important piece of this to talk about is VidWest. Have folks heard about VidWest before? Mm-hmm. Less hands go up. VidWest is a community media center. It used to be Cat TV. They run the cable channel that nobody's ever seen or watched, but it's out there. It plays 24/7, and VidWest does that now. But VidWest is also a community media center. So very much like a spiritual cousin of KOPN, you can go to VidWest and get audio and video gear, you can get training, and you can get the software to do the video editing. So as my business has evolved, and even with the Oral History Project, people in 2023 don't just want audio, they want pictures. So my background was radio, so I had to learn how to bring video to it. So VidWest has been elemental in the KOPN Oral History Project because Matt Schacht, who is like the king of the place over there, but he would never call himself that. He's the spark plug, one of them. And he checked me out cameras. So when I interviewed Al and Margie and Lee and all these folks, it was with VidWest gear mostly. Some of it was Joe Wayner. Joe is the husband of Second Ward City Councilwoman Andrea Wayner, and Joe works at Central Methodist. And Joe walked into Midwest and said, I want to do a community project, and Matt introduced us. So Joe brought this professional level of production that he does at Central Methodist to the KOPN Oral History Project. So you might notice if you, as you look through the videos, and I'll tell you later where to find them online. As you look through them, the ones that Joe's involved in at the old station are really sharp, and the ones later, not as sharp because Joe wasn't there. But we got them. And all those people are still around. They can tell more stories, but at some point they won't be, and I won't be. And it just seemed like a good time to get these stories. So what I wanted to do was just give credit where credit is due to people like Joe and Matt and Sarah Catlin. You know, she's wearing her Democrats hat today. She doesn't have a hat on. She's hatless, but she's got some nice purple highlights in her hair. Sarah was very supportive and clutch in this, because at that time that we did these interviews, April 1st and 2nd, with the main bulk of them, she was general manager at KOPN. Interim general manager at KOPN.
One of her interims. Probably.
So it was important to me that this wasn't a Trevor project or a Joe project. This had legs of its own. So for all those interviews, I lined up another volunteer to do the interviews. Because as Sarah, Sarah's juggling all these balls today, trying to like have the meeting, but the Zoom thing. And again, the Zoom folks, we're so glad that you're here. So glad you're here. It's just a lot to juggle. So having Joe there with the camera expertise, having me just like receiving the folks and just kind of trying to be the glue that holds it together, and then having these other volunteers, that was a lot of stuff moving. And I think we did a pretty good job. So what I wanted to do was just to say all that to set this up, that I want to show you a few clips from, we did 13 interviews. And can we slide through one more slide, please? So there's what KOPN is. We can go one more. So there's names there of the people on the screen.
I'll fix it.
We interviewed, and I've pulled from a few of those today. And part of who we've pulled from is just a function of like how far I am in editing, because my goal is to take all these videos and put them up on YouTube. So half of the videos live on my Recollection Agency YouTube page and KOPN's YouTube page. KOPN's YouTube page, Jed and Dylan Martin, Jed Ainsworth and Dylan Martin have put some more pizzazz, some more elements on those videos on the KOPN page. That all said, I've kind of grouped these videos into three, and the first one is of Dave Taylor and Pat Watkins. And I want to show it first because it took, I got to be careful. I'm not going to say the most work, but it took some work. It took some work to get to this point. And part of it is every interviewee has a certain, what they come to the interview with and how ready they are to do that thing. And some of it is just relationships. And I didn't know Dave and Pat. I had met Pat when she was interim general manager like 30 years ago, but that was it. So we're not buds. So it took work to, I felt like Pat and Dave, but Pat especially was the only one who could tell the story. One of very few people who could tell the story. So part of who got interviewed was who said yes, who's available, and I put a bias on who's local. We did a couple Zoom interviews just because it was important to interview Dave Parra and Susan Newstead. So those people got in, and there's a whole bunch more people with the Zoom interview. It's just been only limited to volunteer energy. So I want to show the first video. And when we were previewing this earlier, it's of Dave and Pat, and Dave said, "Oh my God, you're going to show that? Don't show that." So, but Dave did give his consent that we could share these things. So it's a short video about the origins, and then I want to roll right from that into an excerpt from Margie Sable. And many people know Margie. She was involved, not at the beginning, but she was there early on and for a duration. And both of them are talking about some of the same people. So that's why I'm going to play these two clips together.
I'm going to open it anew. I think it's.
It looked like it was about to do.
Yeah, it looks like it was not. It'll just take a second.
So the Zoom folks, Sarah is jockeying the Zoom, putting it through its paces.
I think it just, whenever y'all got kicked off, I think it kind of needed a minute.
Yeah, you're not sharing the video at the moment.
Yep, I just closed it and I'm pulling it back up. Ideally,
Okay.
I think it's
We'll
coming.
be patient.
It worked before.
It should work again.
And I apologize that I've come with the most technically challenging presentation for Sarah yet.
Well, we're trying to do it in 3 different places.
Yeah, I'm trying to do it through. We'll get there.
It won't break my heart if you don't see me on video.
You break my heart.
I'm sure why it's-
Because I felt like with interviewing Pat and Dave, there were only a very small group of people that can say, this is what we did, this is why we did it.
But,
this is
and
how it
for
worked."
people that don't know her, Pat Watkins was one of the originators of KOPN. She was around at the before KOPN started. She was one of the organizers, along with Kelleher and Kathy Bierbach and Harry Pearl. And I think Jeff Mintz.
Good old VLC. There we are. Okay, now, Dave Taylor, remind me, do I need to do something different with the sound?
I don't know. You may have
don't
to
remember what
unmute
we
your
decided.
machine. You may have
Okay.
to unmute your machine. I'll let you know. I'll holler.
Okay. I'm gonna share screen. I've got it up. Here we are.
I see the video.
Make it big.
You can probably make it big.
It's big enough.
And
It's
I
big
wanna make
enough.
sure it sounds-
Plenty big.
Where's my mouse? Okay, so I'm gonna hit play.
Katie and A. And
Yeah, we hear it.
I think they were off the air.
We
by
don't.
Yeah, we went in to talk to Jeremy.
Were they still at Gaslight Square?
They were at Gaslight Square, and
There.
Jeremy Lansman. He was the money behind Katie and A.
Lorenzo Milam owned Katie and A.
And he recalls my insulting him when he asked me what kind of station we want, and I said something about, well, we want it better than Katie and A. We want more public affairs. Not so much, not so many sea shanties, which is what I recall them playing almost constantly. Terry Clifford and Tom Thomas came down and helped us fill out a form to send into the FCC. My parents lent us $500 to beef up our bank account. And that must have been sometime in '71, because we didn't wait much longer than a year before we got our construction permit. We got our program test authority.
November 72.
Yeah, and we went on the air then, and we never stopped.
So this whole idea of 73, well, that's when the license was granted.
Right.
But you're on the air for 6, 8, 10 months before that.
We were anyway.
Yeah. In fact, it was
We
mostly
did 100
fun.
bottles of beer on the wall, which
You acted out live, or I won't say you acted out live, it was enacted.
yeah,
from
it was
bottle one to
live.
bottle 100.
Yeah, and about 75, there were.
There?
I was there.
Oh, I didn't know this.
Yeah.
This was at Jake's house, right?
I
Yeah,
know,
it was
I
at,
lived around the corner.
it was at Jake's house on that little stretch of
It's Richardson
ash
Street.
that doesn't exist anymore. Yeah, Richardson. Yeah, and they did 100 bottles of beer on the wall and audio taped the whole thing, recorded the whole thing, and then we played the whole thing. They did it live on the air, and then we played an edited
Well,
version.
it wasn't live on the air. It took place overnight, so it
Yeah,
didn't happen.
It took a lot of hours to
Yeah,
sing
it
and
did.
drink that much, so. it's
So
my
it
observation.
It was little pieces at a time throughout the. I became program director, and Mensa's focus was on music, which he was extremely knowledgeable about.
Unbelievable.
And then I became program director, and I really didn't know anything about music, and I was just a facilitator. But I was good at program development. I would go out and hornswoggle people and organizations into coming up and doing shows and being creative and getting involved.
Training.
And I thought a long time later that what commercial stations did as promotions, we did as program development. We went out and got the community involved. And got them on.
Now this rolls into Margie.
KOPN actually changed the course of my life in a significant way, which is that I was living in St. Louis and I was interested in getting involved in radio. And there was a station founded by Jeremy Landsman in St. Louis called KDNA, which he sold at one point, and the equipment was then donated to people here in Columbia who were trying to get a radio station going, which was KOPN. And you know, things were going slowly in St. Louis with trying to get, they now have a station, KDHX, but when I was living there, you know, it just was going slowly. So at one point I had the opportunity to move with my job to a position here in Columbia. I was working for Reproductive Health Services in St. Louis, and they had a position that was open here for counseling and referrals to the clinic in St. Louis. And so I thought that would give me a chance to do radio. So I moved here really for that job, but really because I would be able to work at KOPN. And so I remember the first time that I came to the station. I moved here, and very shortly after I moved in, I came down here and came up, and Jean Palmquist, I think, was the lead person for the feminist radio collective at the time, which was called the Crystal Set Feminists, and she was up here, and I talked to her, you know, I just sort of showed up and said, "Hi, I'm Margie, and I want to do radio," you know. And
she said yes.
And she said, yeah. So you know, I had to get a license, and I had to, you know, go to Kansas City and get the license and do all that. But I got involved with the Crystal Set Feminists and we rotated the Sunday programs like you do now. And I did a couple of other programs too, which was, I did one of the morning air programs, which played, you know, wake up classical, Baroque, Renaissance, and classical music. And I started a new program on Thursday evenings called The Brazen Hussy. And for that program, I played all women's music. So not necessarily feminist music, but all women artists. So sometimes I would play folk, and sometimes I would play rock, and sometimes I would play blues. Sometimes I would play jazz. You know, there's so many female musicians in all those categories.
What was the time period of this?
It was 9:30 to midnight.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't stay up that late anymore. But anyway, so, and then I would have guests come up. Sometimes they would come up and play music. Sometimes they would come up and talk about a certain topic that I was focusing on. I used to call them guest hussies, and they would have their own names. My name for that program was Rosie O'Reilly, and I kind of got into that identity for a while.
Yeah. Well, and I've wondered this when we've talked about this before. Where did the idea for the name come from?
Well, I had a friend in St. Louis whose car was named the Brazen Hussy, and so I liked it. And my middle name is Rose, so I came up with Rosie. But what I didn't finish telling you was that because I moved to Columbia, the next year I met my husband, and or the person who would become my husband, and I had these 2 kids, and you know, none of that would have happened if I hadn't wanted to do radio. So there you go.
So that was kind of some origin stories, and my goal there was just to hear from some longtime KOPN people. And my goal with the videos today, and we got 2 more, I think, is to show an arc kind of KOPN's like birth and growth decay and rebirth. So next video is from Butch Burrell. And Butch was the program director when I walked up to KOPN in 1989 and 90. And he was just the best person for that job at that time. So he was really influential to me. He was there and David Owens was there. And Butch put me in the studio, and I'd never been at a radio station before. And he put everything on cue and said, here, practice, and walked away. And to like an 18, 19-year-old, that freaked me out in a good way. And then I'm, still involved with the radio station. So Butch was a really important person. And come to find out that Butch hadn't been up to the station in like 30 years. And with COVID had definitely retreated and doesn't get out a whole heck of a lot because of the fear of the virus. And I think that's ebbed a little bit. So I actually went out and visited Butch at his place a couple times after the interview, and he's still doing well. And his son's a poetry professor at Lincoln University. And so the next video, I believe, is of Butch. And yeah, I won't say anymore. I'll just let it stand on its own. Thank you all for coming and being part of this.
Maybe a time when you didn't think something was going to work, but it did. Anything like that you could remember?
Oh, Lord, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Life. Oh, life's working out pretty good, though.
Yeah.
Well, yes, but it really doesn't have anything to do with the workings of community radio. But we found out that we could do concerts. We were doing stuff with the Blue Note, and we would advertise for the Blue Note, and then we'd get a little bit of money off the thing, Cool. And we did several. We did some great concerts. We did some great concerts. Yes. I thought one in particular was there's a band called the Dillards, and the Dillards were on the Andy Griffith Show. They were the Darling Boys. I don't know if you ever watched the Andy Griffith Show, but they were the Darling Boys up in the mountains that played the fiddle and the banjo, and and so we had a Rodney Diller album here, and I was playing music off of it, and I knew about the Dillards, and had heard about the Dillards, but didn't know that too much about them. But at that point in time, I was dealing with Keith Case out of Nashville, who was representing most of the artists that are brought in. And one morning, I'm sitting in the office in there, and I'm looking through his brochure, and Rodney Dillard, he covered Rodney Dillard. So I called him up, and these guys hadn't played together for over 20 years. And so I called him up and called Keith up and said, is there any way you think we can get the Dillards back together? And it was kind of silent for a second. He said, what? I said, is there any way we could maybe do a Dillards concert and get the Dillards back together? He goes, Butch, they hate each other.
They hate
He said, they haven't played together in over 20 years.
Really?
And I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't know, I'm like, okay. And he laughed, he's like, man, I'd never get those guys together.
Wow.
And so we talked a little bit about something else. And then at the end of the conversation, he says, when I talk to Rodney again, I'll ask him about that. I'm like, okay. It was about 2 weeks later, I got a phone call. He's like, I talked to Rodney, and he's going to talk to everybody else. And I think maybe these guys might do this. And I said, are you kidding? He goes, no. He said, now how are you going to do this? I said, well, we got a hall and everything. And so I give him, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And so then he called me back about 3 days later. He says, I don't believe it. They're going to do it. And I'm like, wow.
Wow.
Cool. That's going to be great, man, It was about a week later. I'm in the air room, and Jan, I think was her name, was our secretary at that time. She says, there is a Mitchell F. Jane on the phone for you. And I said, Mitchell F. Jane, okay. And so I picked it up. I said, hello. He says, this is Mitch Jane. And I said, yes, sir. With the Dillards. I said, oh, Mitch. He goes, who the hell wants to hear us? I'm like, well, everybody wants to hear you, Mitch. He says, I'm deaf as a snake. He said, who's going to hear us? And I'm like, right. And so anyway, you talk with him. We did the show, Joseph. We filled the hall.
Yes.
It was the comic book club. It's the Blue Note now,
Okay.
but it was the comic book club then.
Mhm.
We rented that out. We filled the hall. They came. It was pretty wild. They came and they did their show, the songs that they could remember. And then people were dancing in the aisles and in front of the stage, and
Oh, wow.
and Rodney, they get to the end of their set, and Rodney is like, Rodney Dillard, he approaches the audience and he says, well, that's all the songs that we can play right now. You want us to do them again? Yes. And they did it again.
Encore.
You know, and I mean, it was great, and people just loved it.
Wow.
And the next morning, Keith Case calls me. How'd it go? It went great, man. It went great. You know, and I told him everything I just told you.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's like, wow, oh, I'm so glad to hear that. Man, I'm glad to hear that. From that concert, the Dillards, well, they went to New York after that.
Wow.
And then they did a complete national tour all over this country. They went to France.
Yeah.
They went to England, I think. They went to Japan.
Wow.
They made records, inducted into the Bluegrass Hall of Fame.
Wow.
They'd have never
had
done it
something to do
if they'd have never done that had not
Wow.
KOPN brought them up here.
Now,
Now the story doesn't end there, Joseph.
it doesn't end.
No.
That's good.
Mitch Jane lived in Columbia at one time as a young man, worked at the theater, and moved back here. And Mitch moved back here and lived over on the west side of town and was up here pretty frequently and did radio. Him and his wife did radio for us for over a year.
That was it something at the back porch? Their show was like back porch bluegrass or front porch bluegrass. Something about the porch.
You got a good memory.
Rich and his wife. Yeah, I don't remember it. I just know it. Know the fact.
Butch was the Tennessee Hound Dog. Some KOPN people have, different personas. I mean, someone like Al Tacker's, Al's just straight ahead. He's Al Tacker. He's not like trying to be somebody else. Butch got into persona and was the Tennessee Hound Dog on the Cedar Creek Piccolo. It was his longtime show. But nobody trumps Lee Ruth because Lee Ruth was on from the first week and he's still on. So this is the last video. It's like 5 or 6 minutes, but it tells about a period that was not entirely positive and how KOPN came out of that.
He's still on the air, and it's like, what is it? His shift's like 2 to 5 a.m. And when I was general manager, we had to reshift the schedule, and I asked, would you like some Saturday afternoon? Like, what do you want, Lee? I'll make it happen. He's like, no, I'm good. I like 2 in the morning. So he was offered pretty much anything he wanted by me and said, nope, he liked the middle of the night.
They actually declared the station dead at some point and had an all-station meeting. And the first thing we were told is, we are not here to talk about KOPN. We are here to talk about, KOPN is no more. We are here to talk about the only thing of value that we actually have here, which is this frequency that we have the rights to, and what we're trying to do, what we're here to do tonight is to discuss how we might put this frequency in the hands of somebody that would do a good thing with it. One of the things that was happening is those frequencies were being purchased by wealthy right-wing industrialists and capitalists and who turned them into propaganda stations, for right-wing propaganda. And so the idea was to try to get KOPN in the hands of somebody that wasn't going to be doing that. And at that, KBIA eventually did get their second channel so that they could do classical music round the clock and still do their NPR connected programming too. But at that time, there was a possibility that KBIA would have been interested in our frequency, so they could set up their dual programming thing. So I don't know, somewhere near the end of that meeting, somebody stood up and said, this is a whole bunch of bullshit. I don't agree that KOPN's dead. And all of us who've been sitting silent said, "Amen." Yeah, we jumped on it. So there were so many people that were not, that were against the idea of declaring KOPN dead. What had happened under Steve Spencer is that we had gone from $56,000 in debt to $112,000. It doubled our debt in 12 months. One of these loans was due, borrowed money or not paid for programming from Pacifica and various other places that we were buying programming from. Another meeting was scheduled at a larger location than the one that was down on, which is what is no longer, but now part of the courthouse area there. We had a meeting there, and instead of having 30 or 40 people, there were 100, 120 people there. And before the meeting was over, they had 10 or 12 different committees set up to deal with all different aspects of what it was going to take to keep KOPN on the air. No, for a while, no actually paid employees. There was a team of 2 or 3 people that were taking care of the management in the office and all of it on a volunteer basis, and splitting up the time each week that needed to be done, and the entire board of directors was changed over, and they got up some people that had money connections in town to be part of the board of directors to help with the fundraising and work out a deal with the bank so that we could get an extension on paying the loan. I think the bank president was part of the board of directors for a while after that.
Yeah, so lesson learned, you always want to put the bank president on your board of directors if you're having some financial troubles. So there's some of the KOPN oral histories, and an increasing number of them live on my business YouTube page, and I'll float some. I got some cards around with my website on it, and here's some KOPN stickers. One KOPN sticker.
Yeah, but I want to cover.
So the challenge became, not challenge, the opportunity became, well, what do we do with them? What do we do with the videos? And Margot McMillan, who many folks may know, she does a long-time show called Farm and Fiddle on KOPN. Margot wanted to take a couple months off to write a book. So Margot has written a book about the 50th anniversary of KOPN, sponsored by the Missouri Humanities Council. So that book is going to be coming out as a pledge premium this year. But Margot wanted to take a few months off from the show. So Margot, who in this all is also in charge of the KOPN archives, right? So this is physical media that there wasn't room for when the station moved from 915 East Broadway to Bernadette last year. So that's all at a secure location in the Presbyterian Church downtown. And Margot said, Trevor, why don't you take some excerpts from these oral histories and some archival stuff and have some theme and make a theme and then air them over a few months. So when a wise person suggests that you do some very specific thing, you don't say no, you say, when do I start? So it was a hell of a lot of work. And I did 13 episodes on a theme, and every oral history ended up excerpted in that radio show along with archival stuff. Like, for instance, when we played some of Butch Burrell's oral history, we also played archival material of his son, who was involved in children's programming and is now the poetry professor at Lincoln University. And we had some live bluegrass in there because Butch is in the bluegrass. So Eli was on I interviewed him on the phone. So we had him as like a 10-year-old with Christine Gardner doing programming, him as like however old he is now, talking about what it was like to grow up and have KOPN be a backdrop for that. Because that was a whole lot of work for a 1-hour show. I've turned it into a podcast. So I'm editing them down for evergreenness and putting them out. KOPN is launching a podcast initiative through Mixcloud. I don't find a link online yet. Can we go back to the PowerPoint, maybe, please? If you just search KOPN podcast, the Mixcloud is like the second thing that comes up. But there's a whole group of producers out there who are doing shows that may start on the radio, or they may have no relationship to the radio. And KOPN is being an umbrella for encouraging that kind of production. So hit the next slide, please. Yeah, there we go. Where to see and hear the KOPN oral histories. I've mentioned YouTube pages where the very lightly edited videos are. And then the radio show that's now a podcast is at that mixcloud.com/KOPN. So I want to thank Margot for figuring out a way to kind of get these out, and Jet Ainsworth for hosting them on the YouTube page. I've talked a whole lot. I've shown some of the work I've been part of. Do folks have questions or comments or thoughts, reactions? I know that Muleskinners want to have a meeting here.
Is this the last slide or is there one more?
There might be one more.
I think there's one about the-
Might be
yeah.
one more. Oh, we mentioned that we're doing this because KOPN is 50 years old, June 9th, 10th, and 11th.
That's not this coming weekend, but the next weekend.
A week and a half. There is a whole puzzle of stuff going on, a whole slew of stuff going on. So no matter when you're available, if you're available that weekend, but the big event is going to be at 1 o'clock on that Saturday, June the 10th at KOPN. And I think there's the staff has secured a building next door for.
It's the Union Hall that we kind of back up to in the new building over on Tiger Lane, just to have more space. And the parking lot will be in the station and the Union Hall.
It's like across from Westlake.
Yeah.
Yes. So if you don't know where 411 Bernadette is, if you know where the Westlakes is on Worley, the new KOPN building is across from Westlakes, across Bernadette from Westlake.
Looks across the side of the Westlake parking lot, I always say.
Yeah, so it's definitely a different view out the air room window. You know, you used to look at the alley and whatever weirdness was in the alley, and now you look out across Westlakes and Steak and Shake. But I embrace that. When I do a live show, I give a report on like the status of the mulch piles and the drive-through has capacity, and you know, if you can't be with the one you love the one you with.
So Dave is helping run tech from the backside. He's pulled up, this is on the KOPN.org website. There's at the top on the very front page, there's an Anniversary Central link. If you click it, it gets you to here. We're collecting RSVPs with that blue link. And then, is there a schedule of events yet, Dave, listed here? I don't know. Right here, oh yeah, right above Marge's picture. Thank you. Yeah. That's some of it. There's more live performances happening than that too. There's all kinds of different things. Margie's doing a walk downtown. People are coming from out of town.
Yeah, so there's a personal invitation. If you don't have plans, Saturday, June the 10th, 1 o'clock, come on over to KOPN. RSVP, you might get some extra goodies. If you don't, wait till the end, you might get some extra goodies.
And then Sunday, starting from at noon, we're going to be over at the Gordon Shelter at Stevens Lake Park. I thought it was at Cosmo. That's interesting in my mind. Stevens Lake and Gordon Shelter is the one that's right at the top of the hill. It's the one you would want. That's next to the big playground, the bathrooms to the right and playgrounds to the left. There's going to be a jam session. That's going to be more laid back, just kind of visiting and potluck style. But anyone's welcome to just drop in.
Mary Jo's got a question.
I do have two questions, actually. One, Lever, what era was that when KOPN was in jeopardy of
which time?
Points there.
Al, I'm kind of looking at you.
Early 90s, those
Dave Taylor
meetings.
says early 90s.
Yeah.
Those meetings it was when bingo was failing and they would run out of money and not writing any grants. And yeah, it was a bad time. It was about the same time Pat and I were starting BXR.
And then to answer Kathy Jensen's other question, the person interviewing Margie, that's Victoria Day. She's one of the Women's Issues, Women's Voices hosts, which is the show that I sometimes do. She's we have a cohort that does it. She's one of them. Alice Turner's got her hand up.
Well, this is not a question, it's a comment. I kind of moved to Columbia because of KOPN 2. My job doing progressive politics, and I knew Margie from St. Louis had ended. And I would visit Columbia and I call, well, this is my back to the land experience, this little town. But I heard KOPN and I went, this little town has a Jewish hour? This little town. And so it was an impetus for me to move here. You know, we didn't have the trail yet, but we had KOPN.
So,
yeah.
Yes, I did have another question.
Mary Jo has a question.
Yeah, I have a question about your podcast and things related to it. Have you done anything about the sports covered on KOPN? Which I haven't heard anything about anywhere.
Mary Jo asked the question, have we done anything about sports at KOPN? The answer is no. It came up a little bit in terms of, the KOPN would air, I mean, maybe Al talked about this a little bit. Football games, if they weren't being aired, it was the community orientation. So I didn't set out to find somebody who could talk about sports. I know it came up there. I will say that if there are people who feel like I got something to say about the history of KOPN and I want to talk about my sports programming, I am happy to work with them to do an interview. I only picked, we interviewed these people that we did just based on capacity and time and wanting to kind of shut it down as a cohort. But with the podcast, you can have infinite episodes, so we can come back. And you got anybody in mind?
Well, one fall, Hickman High School football was being broadcast in KFRU and Rockridge on KTTR AM. And the last minute KTTR said, well, we're changing our format, we're not going to do that. And KOPN said something and said, okay, we'll do that. And I was one of the broadcasters on there. And another was Tom Doerr, who had been a Missouri basketball player and ended up being the voice of the Chicago Bulls, I believe, on cable. So he basically kind of got his broadcasting started. Yeah.
Here's some insights.
I'll do it.
Here's some inside scoop. Last week we turned down being the official radio station of was a Mizzou baseball or something.
Wow.
Is looking for a new home. They got kicked off or wherever, and they approached Jet because he does a lot of sports broadcasting for Learfield, and there's just not. We don't have the capacity, nor do we want to interrupt our programming that much to do whole baseball games. But I mean, they approached us, which was flattering. There are two questions at home. They've been so patient. Carl, what would you like to say? And I'll say Carl has been a longtime programmer. He does the Thursday morning air, the classical, and he's the only morning air person that has come back to the studio and does that live. So if you call the studio on Thursday morning, you might get to talk to Carl.
Yeah, you might if I'm willing to answer the phone, but
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm kind of busy. It's a wonderful place, KOPN, and now with the new studios, it's amazing. I mean, they're even better studios than some of the commercial radio stations have. My history goes back a little ways with this. Actually, KOPN has always been kind of hand to mouth for a lot of years, and I served on the board for several years in the 20-teens, if you will. And it was near extinction as well in terms of loans and so on and so forth. It was always a struggle to get that. But I started out, I guess, apprenticing myself with Bruce Gordon, who is a longtime classical radio station programmer, and did that for a few months. And then all of a sudden he said, here, it's yours, you do. And I think I started on Tuesdays and then eventually Thursdays. And I've been doing that, I think, ever since about 2010 or 2011. So it's been a dozen years or so. And there have been some real remarkable people, Andrew Twaddle and Al Tacker and a few others who have been doing this for a long time. And now we're doing it every morning from 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock in the morning. A lot of it now is programmed from home, but for me, it's a respite to get in and play the best music that I ever had and spend 3 hours and listen to it myself and invite other people to do it as well. So it's been a remarkable place. KOPN is kind of the inheritor of some of the Pacifica stuff, the stuff that started in California and eventually in Houston, Texas. I remember I was in Houston and the Pacifica station was bombed off the air with a stick of dynamite. I mean, it was early on. So some of these stations,
by the Ku Klux Klan, Carl.
Right. And some of these local radio stations that have survived with the kind of diversity that KOPN has is pretty remarkable. So if you're still taking interviews, I'd be willing to, share some of that stuff as well. But the classical music has been a gem, I think, as far as KOPN is concerned, and I don't know. I probably will be doing this for at least for the near future for a while. So it's been a lot of fun.
I just changed our sound input. Can you guys hear me at home on Zoom?
Yeah, you sound
Yeah,
fine.
okay, good.
Yes.
Okay, I think Dave Taylor, I figured out I needed to put the speaker onto the projector, not my laptop. So now people in the room can hear a little better. It's not great, but it's better. Okay, Tillamus, somebody there has a yellow hand up.
Yes, it's me. Okay, a couple of things. First of all, our older daughter did participate for 6 months or one semester anyway. And I don't remember the name of her show, but it was Tanya Mudrick and Anne. Tanya was a 6th grader. Anne was a 4th grader. So needless to say, and Tanya's a pretty outspoken person. So needless to say, Tanya ran it. But 2 things that happen, it really gives you kids a quick learning. The first time they thought they had a program and they got done in 10 minutes. It was a half-hour program. So they went racing around to find records to fill in the other 20 minutes. Another time they decided to do it on, they did it on the universe, but they hadn't remembered how to practice how to say some of these words that they weren't so familiar with. So it was a bit of an issue. But I think both of our daughters, they used to also have like a 1 week or 2 week summer camp for kids. Both of our daughters did.
Radio theater workshop.
I don't remember.
Radio theater workshop. Yeah, we had
I think maybe Christine Gardner was part of that.
Absolutely.
If I remember correctly.
Actually, Jake Schumacher, myself, and Teresa Baker and Chris Merrick got that started in 1978 and 9.
Wow. Wow. And the other thing, it was Paula McFarlane that specifically helped them on their show. But there also was one group, Talking Flies, that were on for quite some time. But the other thing I just wanted to ask, was it Sean Spence that you referenced when things went downhill?
It's before that when Carl was on the board, I think.
Okay, I couldn't hear that. You said Steve something, but
There was a guy named Steve Spencer who was one of the general managers, and he, for better or worse, I mean, I was a young person then, he caught a lot of the ire of people because he made decisions that kept KOPN on the air but increased the debt. So, and
I served with David Owens, and then later Sean Spence took over after I got off the board. But it seems like there was always a tenuous time. There was always a money issue in terms of loans and all the rest of it when they were due. And we were always constantly struggling, except for the very recent, the past here now.
Dave Taylor said, ask Al Tacker to talk about the live city council meetings that he used to broadcast and provide commentary for, which I've been watching him from home after I put the kids to bed, and that public comment can be pretty entertaining.
You should do it today.
Yeah.
It's pretty unfiltered back then.
I don't know, city council has a lot of exposure anyway, so I'm not sure you want to really do that, but
I wouldn't call that canopy ugly, and nobody in the city would talk to me for weeks.
But back in the day when Al was doing those live broadcasts, people there was very little exposure to the city council, and they were not always happy that they were live on the air back when Bob Pugh was the president and all that. But yeah, Al did a great service to the community and opening all that up, and KOPN airing it every Monday night. Sometimes they were interminable, but it was a real public service.
I also want to mention the great service that KOPN has done in covering the forums and debates that the League of Women Voters facilitates for the local.
That was me lately. You're welcome.
Yeah. It's incredible to be able to reach a wider audience that way.
Yeah,
it's pretty incredible when you tune into KOPN when it's local programming, and imagine how much time went into these programs. You know that these are all labors of love. I used to skate up there as a younger person to do a jazz show and have no plan and get there at 2 till 8 and just grab some records and go. And you can do that, and KOPN allows you to do that, but it also it can enable you to do great things like the kind of things that Al did, where there's a need and someone steps up and fills that need. So, and KOPN is still there doing that. So lots of opportunity. If folks have not been up there, I'm not even plugging.
It's not
doing
even
the
up
show.
anymore. It's just in.
If folks have not been over there, please avail yourself of some of the activities and come out on June the 10th if you can. I want to be respectful of time because we're almost at 1. Do you want to take another question? Do you want to have your?
What we can do the meeting after 1.
Okay,
It's very, it
okay,
takes 10
okay,
minutes.
all right.
David
Can I-
Robinson.
Can
Oh,
I do
yeah,
one
sorry.
quick thing, just a real quick thing? I think that didn't Almeda Creighton and Wanafay have a
Yes, they were
program?
on Saturday afternoons. They showed up just after what was the show that Walt did? The Soul Show on Saturday. And Alameda and Wanafay were integral in helping us reach the African American community. And that Saturday programming still exists. That same
Yep.
slot.
It goes Motherland Jam,
Yeah.
and then one mic, and then Mike Hagan does 2 hours of live music, and then Morgan comes back and does a reggae party.
Yeah, Walter Anderson did a soul show called The Sugar Man. It's called, he was the Sugar Man. And he brought the Legion of Black Collegians up. We had them with a regular show every week. And we had Dr. Arva Strickland come up. He was on at least once a month with them. So yeah, it was a pretty big deal because nobody else in town was doing any programming for the African American community at all.
Now we have the only Spanish language programming at all, TV or radio in the whole mid-Missouri area. That's the 2 hours we do on Saturday morning. That's it. David had a question.
I came here from Berkeley, so the Pacifica background actually meant nothing because everything was so distinctive here. So many distinctive shows. I'll have to say Farm and Fiddle captured my imagination early and kept it. But for historians, how many of these things are archived? I mean, I could imagine doing Farm and Fiddle through 40 years and learning a lot as a historian. What do you have on tape, on storage? What kind of sources are there?
I'm kind of looking at Sarah here. So Sarah is part-time staff at the station.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of archival stuff that's on CD or reel to reel.
Yeah.
So Margot and Joy Rushing are working through that right now and figuring out what needs to be digitized, what is just stuff that we kept that's like national programming somebody sent us and it just ended up in the box. So there's that. At the station, there is a year's worth of shows on the computer in I call it the green room, or just the main room there. So like when I had done my show, the KOPN the first 50 years, I went in there with a hard drive and got those 13 episodes off of there. And I could have gone back and got Farm and Fiddle for a year. So to answer your question,
there's a lot.
The last 52 or 51 weeks of the Wednesday 6 o'clock hour are on that computer. So if you wanted to get a show, I would go in there with a jump drive or just call Jet and say, hey, can you share those files with me? Because the online archive
is incomplete.
But
there is quite a bit at kopn.org if you go to the different show pages. The show, you can go to the show and there's for sure, if it's a music show, we can only rebroadcast the last 2 weeks because of music licensing and what we pay for. That's going to change supposedly with this AMP network on Mixcloud. They have a broader license. So when we put music shows on the Mixcloud AMP network, it can be forever, is what I was told.
So I'm hearing historical resources are pretty rich, really.
David, there's a project that WGBH is heading up. They're working with the Library of Congress, and it's called the American Public Radio Archive. And we are sending, and they are archiving stuff from digitizing and archiving stuff from all over the country for the last 50 years. And we are sending them a ton of stuff. In fact, university has a grad student working with us to help figure out which of the programs have copyright releases so they can be sent to the archive and made available to the public. And even the stuff that isn't available to the public is still going to get archived. So it's happening finally after all these years. It's a huge project, and Margot and Joy, Christine Gardner have been in charge of kind of
Jackie Castile helped a lot
sorting
with-
through the KOPN tape library. I've been helping a little bit these last several weeks, but they've been at it for a year. And so it's happening.
We did it last year and I believe the year before as well. They have a grant and it's been renewed and each year we can send a chunk of
Right.
tape. So we prioritize, these are for sure gonna go, and now we can get a little, farther away. The trouble is the reel-to-reels are so old, they have to be baked. And then you can listen to them right away, but they have to be like treated in a special oven to even be safely played on a player because they're old and it sticks together. And you can completely ruin it if you just try to play it. So you can't just throw it on a player and play it.
Archival stuff notwithstanding and the value of it and all the rest of it, but if you're really interested in some really decent classical music, you ought to tune in on these live shows.
Thursday
on
morning.
Thursday mornings. I mean, that's-
Advertisement.
Alice has got her hand up here in the room.
So one thing I haven't heard mentioned is Midwest Radio Theater, and I wonder if you still have some of that archived. And I'm gonna give Trevor some names to think of interviewing. But I talked to a woman who lives in Minnesota. She's some kind of professional, and she knew KOPN from Midwest Radio
We
Theater.
were the regional hub for that. Yeah.
Yeah, we brought people in from all over the country. We've had people in from the BBC and the CBC and from South America, producers from New York and all over the West Coast. Some of the best audio people in the country. The organization still exists. It's now called the National Audio Theater Foundation, NATF. And they still do a live thing every year in Kansas City. Their focus now is more audio podcasts and books on tape kind of stuff than radio drama is how it started. But it's all still going on and it's still changing lives. It's changed a bunch and people from all over the country used to come here to Columbia to do it. Now it's the Kansas City. It's called the Here Now Festival is what they do now. And I think it's coming up sometime at the end of the summer.
Would make sense when people are off. Maybe have one last question at home or in the room or comment. This has been great. Thank you everyone who participated and shared, and thank you to Trevor for preparing such a lovely presentation with all the bells and whistles that I hopefully didn't wreck too badly. I think we will move on to the regular meeting here, which will be really quick, and just some announcements, a couple announcements from me and the regular announcements from Pam, and we'll be done. Next week we'll be back on Zoom, and Pam will tell us what we're seeing.
Good.